And then feel free to stare it, because obviously I have no experience with divorce, so I'll just kind of...
Long may that continue, sir.
But is this true?
Yeah.
I remember one conversation we were having, and you were like, "I don't see myself getting married."
I don't see myself getting married.
I don't see myself getting married.
I mean, I love love.
I don't
right?
think I was going to get married the first time it was an arranged. Like, I might bring that up as well, actually.
Yeah,
about how I got into it.
I think because I got so much on that I don't feel like I have time nor the money to dedicate to
marriage,
or having, a wedding.
What about a significant other?
I believe in having a significant other, but right now, because I'm so focused on trying to create stuff, I can't really see.
So what you're saying is that
relationship, or
you're not going for, you're not signing up for any contracts, but any monthly rolling monthly arrangements,
fees,
pay as you go.
I mean,
Pay as you go.
Pay as you go. To be fair, like
let's not take that too literally.
Anyway, come on.
Oh, yeah, cool.
All right, let's get.
Welcome to the Metaforecast. I am the Metaforest, and I'm also partnered with Haroon.
Haroon of Speak Easy with Haroon, conversations with artists, creatives, and troublemakers, and it's a pleasure to be here again.
For sure, and this special guest that we have today is not only one of the greatest writers that I've seen from the poetry scene, but it's also, I consider, a mentor, a big sister, and just an all-round if I'm trying not to swear, I'm MFing badass. It's Neelofer Nova. How are you, Neelofer?
I'm very well, thank you. Absolute pleasure to be here.
Crazy.
With my brothers.
It's definitely a big thing for me, because I think I've wanted to have you on a podcast for a long time.
I've been wanting to come on for a long time.
So I wanted people to know all about you, your backgrounds, and just what you do creatively, because there's a lot of creatives that are trying to break in and or feel underrepresented in their current fields, and you're someone that pretty much pioneers for anyone that is a person of color, that is a woman, that is doing it for themselves, and represents the Pakistani community. Tell us more about how you got around to finding your passion for writing and finding the poetry scene.
So it's a long story, but I'll try and make it short. So how did I get into poetry and spoken word in the first place? So I've always loved writing. In school, I was always, what is it, the left brain or the right brain that's the creative side?
I think it might be the right brain.
I think it's right brain. I think left brain, the
logical. Yeah, so I'm right brain all the way. I mean, we're a mixture of both, all of us, but I would definitely say a right brainer in terms of liking colour and music and creativity and flexibility and all of those things. So anything creative has always spoken to my soul and been where I feel at home. So at school, it was always subjects like, English, where I blossomed in it, rather than subjects like maths and science. So I've always been a very keen writer, and I remember writing poetry in primary school, and then my teacher picking it as one of her favourites, and me sharing it with the class. So little did I know then that in the future I would then become a poet and a spoken word artist. But how I actually got into that was when I was at university. I went to London School of Economics, and I was studying law, and for the first year I was living in halls, and first year of uni you join all the societies and you want to get involved, and doing a law degree, it's very, very heavy academically. There's a lot of case law you need to read, and a lot of studying and reading. So I needed a creative outlet, so I was always writing, but it started off for me actually writing song lyrics, not poetry.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it started off with writing song lyrics, and at the time I was living in halls, there was a bunch of us that came together. So there was two girls from Morocco, one was and they were French speaking, one could rap in French. One of my best friends from uni, she was from Kenya, she came from a gospel background. Anyway, going out, first year of uni, we then met up with this guy who was an Oxford graduate, but who was doing a master's in music production in Caledonian Road, right?
Oh, wow.
So one day he says to us, do you want to come to the studio? Because he has like access to the 24 hours access to the studio. Want to come to the studio? Let's just freestyle. And we all went down there and we jammed in the studio, and there was a buzz that I remember getting that it's just like no other. And then from then, you know, the writing the song lyrics, freestyling, doing all of that in the studio, then developed more into what we know now, or what I know now as poetry and spoken word. And then I joined lots of different societies, and someone said to me, why don't you perform one of your poems at like the Afro-Caribbean showcase at the end of term? And I was like, what do you mean perform the poem? Like, so writing and being and recording it in the studio, that was one thing, but actually getting up on stage and performing it. And the first time I ever did, all of the London unis, it was like a circuit, so it was UCL, King's, LSE, Westminster, all of us, and we did an event at UCL. And I remember Cat B from Choice FM and MTV and all that, at that time he was just getting into hosting events, so he was hosting the event and called me up on stage. Q-Tip was my intro song.
Wow.
Come up on stage, I was well into my hip-hop at that time, and I did my poem, nervous as hell, and the reaction that I got was insane, and I ended up winning it.
Yes.
So yeah, and then from there I started attending open mics. What was back then, open mics was more closely associated with slam poetry. So Farrago Poetry was an organisation that was doing things in like the Poetry Cafe, Shaftesbury Avenue, which was actually around the corner from my halls where I was living. And there were so many events back then, like Black Pepper. So Floetry started at Black Pepper, which was an event at South Bank Students' Union. Yeah, and they're just going to more and more events and paying your dues, as it were. So yeah, started off on an open mic many moons ago, which might give an indication of how old I am. But yeah, that's how I got into it. And since then, I've taken it in many different directions. So I've recorded my music to music. Recorded my poetry to music. Worked with producers, international producers. Had some releases on record labels. I've taught in academies overseas, so I've taught poetry workshops, been on radio overseas. I have a podcast called The Beautiful Truth. I have hosted some radio shows. I've also hosted a few events. As I mentioned before, or I may have, I'm a mentor. So I work with young people and I run workshops. So there's a lot I do. And it's all part of this creative entity that I think we all are, and we all are on this spectrum of how much we can do. I think putting ourselves into boxes is really limiting, and the one thing I've learned through my journey is you can do anything you want to do, and even if you try it and it's not quite your bag, the fact that you've allowed yourself the opportunity to explore it is the biggest gift you can give yourself.
100%. There's something similar that me and Haroon have talked about previously, about just, you know, not being boxed in, and reinvention is also part of your, you know, your arc as a creative, right? There's so many things you touched upon. I wanted to kind of backtrack on some and touch on some of these things. So the Beautiful Truth podcast is something that you were doing in 2021, I believe.
Yeah.
How did you get into podcasting yourself? Because as podcasters, it's a journey in itself. There's a lot of things you have to learn on the fly. What was your platform about in regards to, you know, giving something for its listeners?
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed, so in the past I've been on like BBC Asian Network and been a panellist there, and I've always enjoyed the medium of radio. And so then obviously in recent years podcasting became the thing, and I had this idea and I was talking about it for a while, saying I'd love to have my own podcast because conversation is my thing, right? Yeah. And I believe and my sister's always said to me, you're very good at asking the right questions and getting information from people. Like you'd make an excellent interviewer. And I think that comes from my professional life, where I've worked in corporate and charities and education, and I have interviewed people. So I think there's a skill there. And I spoke about wanting to do a podcast for ages, and then it was just like, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to give it a try. And got myself the equipment, and then got the concept of who it was that I wanted to speak to. So the beautiful truth, the concept behind that is conversations with all different kinds of creatives. So not just poets, not just writers, but actors, playwrights, creatives of any kind. There was a motivational coach that was on one of my episodes as well, who I'd worked with previously, who's made a big difference in people's lives in terms of what she teaches. So the thing about the beautiful truth is I wanted to get behind the truth of the person behind what they do. So for example, if they're a playwright, you know them for their work, for their published works, but who is the person, who is that playwright? Or if it's an actor, so the beautiful truth is about just really getting into the crux of that conversation with the person, where they feel that they can share their story and their journey. So I started recording it at home, and then pandemic happened. And then it was lockdown, and it became logistically quite difficult. And then, like yourselves, I was in a podcasting studio and recorded an episode, and then had it videoed as well. And it's one of those things where I did 4 or 5 and realised, okay, not only am I hosting it, I'm producing it, which means you do all of the admin behind it, you do the editing, you do the scheduling, you do the planning, and it's a lot. It's a lot. So what I would say is I'm very proud of myself that I tried it, but without a team, or without someone to collaborate with, when you're trying to do something on your own, and I'm not trying to put anyone off here, but the realities of doing things is you can have an idea of wanting to do something and be good at it, but actually the realities of doing it is very different. But I really, really enjoyed the guests that I had on. So I had Purcell Ascot, who's from Mandem on the Wall.
Oh, yeah, I remember him.
And I had Sonia Hale, who's a playwright who now, since God rest her soul, has passed away. One of the most successful playwrights to come out of Clean Break, which is a company that work with ex-offenders or ex-drug addicts, and they rehabilitate them. And she was a very bright talent in that world, and that podcast was actually recorded on location where she lived in Brixton.
Oh, wow.
Very, very special interview. She was a very, very talented and intelligent woman, and had lived a life. So not only had she recovered from, for example, being on heroin and things like that, she totally recovered, turned her life around, became a successful playwright, but then was suffering with cancer. So she was battling cancer when we did that interview. I had my sister, Ambreen, who is a playwright and actress.
And she was actually in season 3 of Ted Lasso.
And
I saw her in that, and she was very, very memorable in it.
Yeah, so her character is very memorable in that. I think she was only in 3 episodes. She is also, incidentally, on The Curse, Channel 4, The Curse, season 1 and 2, where she plays Detective Thread. Very different to her character in Ted Lasso.
Because she was also in the writer's room for season 1 of We Are Lady Parts.
Absolutely. So
along with, I believe, other sort of stalwarts, the poetry scene, Inua Ellams and Zia Ahmed.
Was in that in writer's room, correct. So Nida Manzoor, who directs We Are Lady Parts, was actually directed the pilot of Diary of a Hounslow Girl on BBC 3, which my sister wrote.
I didn't know there was that connection, because I know that your sister was behind Diary of a Hounslow Girl.
So you find in the world of writers' rooms, TV production, spoken word now is coming more into that. That it becomes a very small world. Who people know.
I wanted to also ask, because obviously you've done so much and you've worn many hats. In your days when you were in those positions, did you find that there were a lot of people from your background there, or was it more or less just you were the only person of colour there?
It's a really good question. I would say right in the beginning, I can't remember seeing any brown faces in the
Yeah.
audiences of slam poetry nights, and definitely not actually on the mic. If there were some in the audience, they were definitely, looking around, especially female.
Yeah.
I mean, again, all of these things that I've touched upon, whether it be radio, podcasting, spoken word, slam poetry, all of these things have always traditionally been the arena of men. They've been
Yeah.
very male dominated. So coming in as a woman, one, you're breaking ground and you're somewhat of a pioneer, and then being a woman of colour, number two, and number three, specifically a British, Asian, Pakistani woman breaking into those fields. Not only are you not seeing yourself represented and not seeing any allies, you are then also, unfortunately, sometimes faced with the stigma of your community. So I remember when I first started going to a lot of poetry events, and they're in the evenings, they're late.
Yeah.
So I would get from my family, well, what is it? What is this thing? This poetry, spoken word thing that you do? And are you using it as an excuse to be out late, kind of thing?
Because so for the people who are listening, I'm British Pakistani. Did you have curfews? Because I had them growing up.
I did have curfews, and I often went past the curfews, and I got into a lot of trouble
Same.
for it. But it's funny because it was me fighting against that, because I was very passionate about what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
And what I would say to anyone is, when you have the true courage of your convictions and you have that passion, fight that fight. Even if that fight is against your own culture, your own family, your own environment. Because the day that BBC sent a car to pick me up from my house to go onto the radio, that was when my family were like, oh, right, I get it now. Oh, right, what, because I'm on BBC Asian Network and the car's come to pick me up, it's a prestige status thing.
Yeah.
It also becomes validated.
It becomes validated, but I mean, we've come a long way since then, and there's a lot more of us in writers' rooms, on the television, on radio, in music. There's a lot more of us, but the likes of the Nahal Show and Bobby Friction and people that
you're talking about people are just that. Yeah, that era.
So that I come from that era. I come from a generation where we were really pushing the envelope. And that's why I'm very passionate about what I do and very proud of what I do, because I've been doing it a long time.
Yeah.
And, when I say that to people, and I don't say it a lot because I don't want to be one of those people that's like, well, back in the day. But the truth is, yes, back in the day, I believe the era that I came up in is the golden era. It's one of the best to have happened. You're talking about...
I'm willing to agree, because we were trading some messages back and forth. So I sent... There was this poetry video by Joshua Idahan, and he had some great lines in the poem. And I shared it with Neelofer and a bunch of people of not our generation, because most of the poets are younger than even yourself, Meta.
Yeah.
But unanimously, everyone's like, oh my God, what's this? It's good. And I sent it to Neelofer. Neelofer's like, Joshua's from that era. He's an OG. He's untouchable. And then me and Neelofer got into this whole conversation about, Neelofer reminded me that Neelofer is from that sort of mid to late 2000 era, because that era is the era that gave us, arguably, it was, I don't think Yomi Shodi, that was a bit later, but it gave us In Your Elements, it gave us Kate Tempest, it gave us Polar Bear, it gave us Scroobius Pip, it gave us a lot of the people who are now running around.
Well, it was, that era was full of so much talent.
It also gave us people
Sankara, you had Black Man, Short Man.
Gemma Weeks, also from that era.
Gemma Weeks from that.
The novelist.
You had 3+1, which was Nolan Weeks, who actually was in a relationship with the time Natalie, the flow assist.
Oh wow. Okay.
So yeah, there was just there was so much talent. There was Ian KMT. I'm just thinking about all the events I used to go to. Cat Francois, who is a very respected poet in the community
legend.
now. Yeah, she is
Absolute legend.
And I spent a lot of time with people like Kat and her event that she did at Stratford Royal, Word for Word Poetry. We used to be on a Sunday evening. Amazing event in the cafe space of Theatre Royal Stratford. And she was a pioneer, a black woman in the spoken word scene, running her own events, and then went on to write a one-woman show and sort of push the envelope in different directions. So yeah, I feel like I come from, and what's different is when I keep referring to that era, we weren't on Instagram.
Yeah,
There's a big difference. So there wasn't that, people didn't feel compelled to, because it didn't exist, create content for online. Your content that you created was what you brought to the event. Yeah, whether that was your vibe, or whether that was you stepping up to open mic, or whether that was you being headline or featuring, that was your content. And networking was more in person. Now, there are some of us who really make a concerted effort to do that outside of social media. But one difference that I would say with the younger generation is that a lot of their content creation, networking and communication is through the platforms of social media. And I just think that there's that something special missing. There's that authenticity that you miss out on when you're not doing it in person.
So I completely second this. And I think for me, last night was a great example of this. So, there's a Muslim poetry open mic music jam night at Soho Theatre called Makru. I've been meaning to go for ages, and then finally one pops up, and I'm double booked. I had tickets for the sold out run of for black boys who've considered suicide when the hue becomes too thick, which was on at the Apollo Theatre, and my ticket was for the penultimate showing of this 6-week run. I even tried to get the tickets swapped, and they're like, "No, Mr. Khan, it's all sold out."
No chance.
So Makru, I said to them, "Look, it clashes. I can't come," and they were like, "You can't come? And your play's done. Come to the bar. We'll be there. It'll be networking. We'll hang out." The bonds I made yesterday, some of the conversations that were had, and some of the things that are being set into motion yesterday could never happen purely through DMs or any of the stuff that happens on Instagram.
100%. But this is where I've got to shout out Meta, because Meta is the bridge.
Oh, you're gonna make me blush.
No, honestly, is a huge. I've said this to you before, and now I've got the opportunity to say it on this podcast that's going to be recorded and everyone can hear it. I've sent you numerous voice notes, and we've messaged back and forth many times, and when we've hung out and spent time, I've said it to you. You are a shining beacon of the spoken word scene, because you are that magnet, bridge. You're so many things. There's so many metaphors I could use. Metaphorest. But honestly,
the branding has always been strong, as has the SEO.
Yes. But I must say, you have this ability to bring people together, and to create platforms and spaces for people. I mean, when I first met you, you weren't actually getting up to perform on the microphone. You were in the front row of BYOB with your camera, very quiet.
Camera and gimbal. Yeah, let's not forget the gimbal.
The gimbal man, And I remember I went to BYOB, and it was one of my first BYOB events in Wembley Box Park, and I went and did open mic, and then I thought, didn't get any pictures or footage of what I did, and someone said to me, you should contact Meta, because I think he filmed the whole thing. That was where our contact started, and I messaged you, and since then I'm very blessed to say we have become good friends and spent a lot of time and made efforts to really get to know each other. And like you said, I've been able to impart some experience and knowledge and wisdom to you, but also the best leaders follow sometimes. And I think as much as I can teach you, you've passed it on. It's each one teach one. I love that. And you're the bridge, you're not quite mine and Haroon's generation, but then you're kind of that bridge in between the younger poets that have come through or are continuing to come through on the scene, and you're that bridge. For example, when you did the karaoke and food night for poets to get together.
Yeah.
It was such a lovely bonding experience for poets to get together, but that takes someone to coordinate that and pull that together.
You even managed to make me stay for one song.
And I made him sing as well. He wasn't going to sing.
Yeah, you weren't even going to
Boys
stay
to
for the
Men.
karaoke. You were like, food, I'm out. And then, you know,
One Boys to Men song.
you
though.
caught the vibe though, right?
It wasn't the vibe. This man knows me well enough. He knew that if he put Boys to Men End of the Road,
Yeah.
my bum was going to be glued to the seat.
Well, there you go.
And I was going to hit all the bad notes.
But I mean, you know, you've gone from someone who was almost a spectator, you know, who was on the fringes. You've gone from that to becoming absolutely central to so many things in terms of not only being a dope poet, you know, on the mic, doing features, doing headlines now, you know, going from that to putting on your own events. You know, your YouTube channel has grown, your Instagram channel. You are the man. Like, if anyone wants the content or the to test the temperature of what's going on in the scene right now, your channels and your platforms is where to go to. And not only that, you are one of the nicest, humblest, kindest, just you know, how many words I can think of to describe you.
He's a mensch is what he is.
He's a what?
Mensch.
What does that mean?
So it's a word I think that like American Jews use. It's basically it's used for men, and it's to sort of say when someone is just like a top bloke.
Absolutely. Well, I would say, you know, I'm old school and I'm a Londoner, so I would say you're sort of the earth, honestly. And it's very rare to come across people like that. You have a generosity of spirit that not only comes through your work, but just the time that you have for people and the time you invest in people. And so all of this now, you know, sitting here today on your podcast, it's a proud moment. You know, it's momentous, and I'm very happy to be here. But I want to give you your flowers. I want to give you your garden. I want to give you the forest to the Metaforecast, because honestly, well done you. It takes a lot of time and dedication to continue on your creative path when it doesn't always pay. A lot of people give up. A lot of people give up because it's a struggle. It's hard to make it all work. And you've done so many things and you've continued to grow, and it's all deserved. It's very, very well deserved.
I wanted to say that when I first started, I wasn't sure. I've always written poetry, but I wasn't sure if I was a performer. And
you are one.
Thank you so much. And obviously, I found it easier to just film other poets, just because I loved what I was hearing. And to bring it back to BYOB, I think that was the first time I saw, you know, poets of color, because every time I was on YouTube, I did see black poets, I saw white poets, but I didn't see brown poets, like South Asian poets, Southeast Asian poets.
BYOB, I felt like it was a place that brought people together.
Yeah.
You'd have Muslim poets, but the Muslim poets would be from different parts of Africa originally, but they would also be Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi. BYOB's been an interesting place because I feel like you and I have had similar journeys in that BYOB gave us that space to flourish, and we were both behind the scenes.
Yeah,
you're behind the camera,
DJ,
I'm behind the decks.
Yeah.
Because I've been in the scene longer. I actually have known someone like Charney since 2017 when I sort of first got into spoken word in London. But it was that space that allowed me to sort of grow in confidence and then go in front and start fronting and pushing things as well.
Yeah.
What I will say is that it seems like you two's friendship got off to a much smoother start than you and I, which is also a story that we need to document here.
Yeah.
Because we got off to a bumpy start.
I don't know.
Well, not bumpy, but it was Kate Parsley is our mutual friend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she came to some BYOB events and she's like, oh yeah, I brought my friend Neelofer. She's like, legend. Da, da, da. She really talked you up. So I already was like, But also because I'm from a certain era, sometimes South Asians aren't cool with other particularly sometimes Pakistanis in certain spaces are not cool with other Pakistanis.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit, it was nothing to do with you. I was a bit scared. And then you had your own perception issues, which cleared up once you knew that I was autistic.
Exactly. So this is why, again, I come back down to face to face is the key.
You're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
because the time where we cleared all of this up,
we were having lunch on a hot summer's day on a rooftop in Victoria at the food hall. We had Malaysian roti canai. We basically had roti canai from Gopal's Corner.
Me to that food as well.
Honestly, like delicious food. But it was the first time that we'd sat and properly connected because, Kate mentioned to me as well, she was like, oh, you go to these poetry events, my mate goes there as well, you'll see him, this Haroon, like, do you know him? I said, no, I don't know him personally. Then I remember seeing you at Life and Rhymes, the recording of Life and Rhymes, and you were sat on a different table, you were kind of at a distance and looking. Now, the thing of eye contact, and if someone's, nervous to approach and things like that, when you don't know someone, you don't always know the context behind it, right? Yeah. So I actually thought you were a bit standoffish, which is why
I've been accused of that in the past when people don't know that I'm autistic.
Exactly.
Hell, when I didn't know, because I only got diagnosed end of 2020.
Right, exactly. So it just shows you, I mean, that is a whole different podcast episode and conversation in its own right. But it just shows you that actually, and interestingly for me, it was nothing to do with the fact that you're Pakistani or South Asian. It was just to do with you're male. I don't know you, and if someone's standoffish, then I'm not a person. My spirit takes to you or it doesn't, right? Yeah. So if I come across someone I'm not quite sure of, I probably will keep my distance.
I get that, but I think for me, it's a weird one. Maybe it's just the era I was born in or the era I was moving spaces. I always found that when I see the other Pakistani or the South Asian, they don't want to bond with you over being South Asian. Like, they get very weird about it. I've found that, at least in my experience at times, they don't want to talk about being South Asian or Pakistani. They're too busy trying to maneuver a white space.
Yeah, no,
that has been my experience.
That does come into it, but for me, it's brown joy when I see.
No, for me it is. So I was in Birmingham this weekend doing a training session. I'm volunteering for something called the JAG Festival, which is being run by a woman called Aisha Akhtar, who also is involved with the Art Gallery. She oversees Hayati Open Mic as well.
Okay.
And it's actually a very interesting South Asian festival because it's not Pakistani, it's South Asian. It's representing arts, but within the Punjabi and Potwari language and Kashmiri. So those sorts of languages which are not as celebrated in Pakistan. And I think as I've gotten older, for me, there is that joy, of being around other brown people. And it happened again yesterday, meeting the people from Makru, meeting Shazad, Daniel, and Saima, who are the sort of brothers and sisters, sibling team behind Makru. Meeting a guy called Hassan, who I think is South African, but of South Asian descent. Getting to bond with Zara Wrights, yet again. And obviously I'm friends with Chani, who's my editor for my debut book, Press Play. And then I met some other people. I think a guy called Rohan, who's part of Daytimers, which is the revival of the South Asian kind of arts, daytimer energy. And I feel like we're in an interesting time.
We are moving into, I would agree with you, we're moving into
We're growing in confidence.
Yeah, I mean, there's events that I've been to, like Deen and Dunya, and Rumi's Cave Open Mic, that team there. Again, beautiful vibe and atmosphere. And it's really nice to see events that, are not based around alcohol or are not in venues that are pubs or clubs, in terms of that, really, really nice spaces. I mean, they do it in the cafe space of the Roundhouse, which is an iconic venue.
Very iconic.
And Deen and Dunya do it at Bush Theatre.
Another iconic venue.
Another iconic venue, and it was an absolute honour to perform at Deen and Dunya and be in Bush Theatre.
That's actually one of my bucket list things, is to be invited by Deen and Dunya to feature.
Yeah, it was amazing, really, really amazing experience. And the thing about that is because Azan Ahmed, who runs it, is an actor. You know, he does poetry. He's a great poet. And I actually first came across him at Tara Arts in Earlsfield, and he was performing there along Zia Ahmed, and you know, I had a conversation with him, and then he was like, what, Ambreen's your sister? I'm like, you know, it was just like, again, you know, worlds collide, small world. But because he's an actor, and because he, again, you know, we were touching on this before the record button got pressed, but bringing the way forward now, and this is the space we're in and the time we're in now, the way forward, I think, for poetry and spoken word is bringing poetry and spoken word into spaces where it hasn't been. So for someone
and to
like
audiences that it hasn't been.
Exactly. So for someone like Azan, who has brought it to the Bush Theatre, it was amazing because in the audience, you know, you had young actors and established actors, you know, faces who had come humbly just to spoken word night to listen to spoken word. I mean, there were the girls from Rocks that won an award. You know, they were in the audience listening to the spoken word and came up to me afterwards and was like, wow. Because
the audience is filled with a lot of, like, I'm watching a lot of these young Muslim or young South Asian, because the two things are not synonymous necessarily. These 20-somethings who've done stuff already, acted in things on like Netflix and BBC and ITV, and you're just like, this is a really exciting time.
Absolutely. It's fantastic. You know, you've got so many people now who are getting involved in creating theatre, you know, writing plays, you know, and they're creating communities and creating spaces where we're all validated. You know, we're not sit at the back of the room nervous to integrate, or like you said earlier, navigate a space that doesn't feel like it's for us. And we're
not competing with each other, which again, when we move out of white spaces, that pressure to compete evaporates.
Well, this is why I came out of it entirely, and there was this transition period between when I used to do poetry slams and then when I no longer did them anymore, because that side of it for me personally didn't sit very well.
It's competitive nature.
Yeah, the competitive nature, because a lot of it was based around, my experience was based around the battle culture of, you know, like when you have a
from hip hop and also grime, the clash culture.
Yeah, the clash culture. Okay. I don't feel like, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some fantastic slam poets, you know, and they can go and compete and you're like, wow, yeah, amazing. For me personally though, how I choose to express my art and my message just doesn't align with it being, right, you've got 3 minutes and you go up against, and it's round 1 and it's round 2 and there's like a competition element. For me personally, that's not what I'm doing it for. And I think everyone has different motivators and different reasons for why they express. Like for me, I've always said, if I get up and perform a piece, even if there's one person in an audience of 100 who it's touched, I've done my job. And if it's 0, that's also fine, because for me to express my art, that's the main thing. I'm actually not writing for an audience, and I never have done. And I think, you know, that's really important. So for me, during that transition period when I was asked to compete in slams, only a year ago I was asked to compete in a slam for the Speakeasy team, and I said, I don't do slam poetry, I don't compete in slam poetry anymore, but you know, I'm happy to be involved in the team in another way. But yeah, slam poetry is not for me.
I've always wanted to say, like, I think when it comes to your poetry, I've always appreciated, and I've noticed that you write for yourself and you don't write for clicks. You write for your own truth and for you to have that piece spoken in that space and it touch someone. I always say that you're able to write words that shoot people. You're always good. You are really good at shooting people with your words. And there's a couple pieces that I can mention where like people have gone absolute crazy about like just you being so fearless with what you're saying, and you saying it with your chest and just like, yeah, I said it and what. And I really like that mentality that you have, because it's something that I think young poets or new poets will be like, I want to be more myself by watching you. which is also something that I've taken from your mentorship, even though it wasn't like you might not have known it. I was like, okay, I'm gonna take that on board and maybe, you know, bring that to a new piece whenever I write one. So I just wanted to say, yeah, that's my flowers for you. And yeah, like, you're completely right. I think sometimes I felt uncomfortable, like, or we've all felt uncomfortable, like competing, and those spaces are needed where you can just be and exist, and your existence is enough to just, you know, have your work seen.
Yeah, I think there's a few different levels and elements to it. I think
Yeah.
I've been involved in slam poetry where it's been very professionally judged. There's a whole panel, and they mark it on different things, whether that be cadence, content, delivery, all of those things. But then some aren't. Some are judged basically on because favoritism or clickiness in the scene and things like that. And so that then muddies the waters for me. But in terms of saying things with your chest and speaking up, I am a truth teller, and I walk in my truth. I know that, and I've had to learn this on my own personal journey, that speaking the truth sometimes makes people uncomfortable, and I've had to become okay with that. But I've never ever been in anything for a popularity contest. That's just not me. Like, if you don't like it, that's all good, but what use is it having a voice if you can't speak your truth? And that thing about you saying shooting people with words, you know, there's a line in a new piece that I've written called, sometimes they say the bullet of truth travels slowly.
Wow.
But it doesn't happen with me. I shoot my arrows of truth at close range. Right? So
I'm just going to keep at least 2-3 meters distance from you, love.
Point blank range. Yeah, I was like, okay. I knew it was going to hit.
I've got shit to do. I need to stay alive.
You're safe. You're safe. But, you know, metaphorically speaking, I say what I want to say. And this is the whole thing, right? Is that, you know, why are you getting up? When I mentor young people or I do workshops, I say to people, why are you doing it? What's the why? Not the how necessarily. You'll learn that. Everyone's got their own journey of how and their style, and the why.
You bring a little Simon Sinek to the vibe.
Why? No, but why are you doing it? You know, if you're doing it for clicks and applause, and you're doing it for certain popularity, sooner or later it starts to come through. So Roger Robinson, who we all know, on the scene again from the golden era.
Have you picked up his latest ebook on poetry?
No, but I've seen his extracts that he's been posting.
I'll send you a link. You need to get it.
Yeah.
And it's a small world, right? I bumped into him in Brixton, and he's hanging out with one of my friends who's a DJ. I'm like, how do you guys know each other? I was like, how do you know Morris, who's also known as DJ Croc? He's like, oh yeah, we went to uni together at Roehampton. I was like, are you fucking kidding me?
That's crazy.
I don't mind swearing.
No, I don't mind swearing. I don't care about monetization. Motherfucker.
But on this whole topic, one of the questions I've got for yourself, and I actually want some input from yourself as well, Meta, is you said something really interesting, a little detail about like the slam poetry. You said, look, you know, there's like a very small slither of people who do slam who are like really, really good. Do you feel that, with the exception of those who are like really world class at slam, that when we skew certain nights towards the slam format, they're too busy trying to create and communicate and perform for the validation of a competition?
100%. I mean, you summed it up very well there. This is why it's so nice to see the variety of different platforms that have emerged and come about now. So, for example, Speakeasy, run by Meredith, Speakeasy London is an amazing event, because through that platform, I've seen poets who are really like literally trembling and shaking, you know, at the thought of getting up and sharing a poem with people. To now featuring, going on to perform at other events with confidence, hosting events, and that's all because of the nurturing, inclusive attitude and approach that people like Meredith have taken. That's just one, you know, using one example. You know, you've got Killer, who does poetics, That was a great platform. I mean, I remember performing there, featuring, and it was in a farm. Some absolutely amazing diversity within the platforms that are out there now. And this is why this is for the young people coming into the scene, it's really important to understand that once you've found your comfort zone, leave. Go and find somewhere else that you're not so comfortable with. Do not get comfortable performing in front of the same people and with the same people, because what starts to happen is your world becomes very small. Your remit becomes very small. What you think in terms of what the right way is to perform and what the things are to write about, it becomes very, very small. Go into spaces that you haven't been to before. Go and perform to an audience that doesn't really know what clicking for poetry is. Because I tell you what, even for the most seasoned of us spoken word artists, when you go in a room like that and people are looking at you in your face, there's no clicks, there's no say it again, there's no whoop, whoop, all of that, it can make you question yourself. But it's really, really good character and confidence building.
Yeah.
But go into these different spaces. Maybe go to a night where it's not just all spoken word, it's actually music, comedy, different things, drag artists.
So go to, like, for example, one night I would say, if you really want to push and test yourself, go to either Say No More or Future Flex. Both are run by Lunar Legacy
as well.
Groovers, but particularly those two nights. Although, for full disclosure, I work for for Lunar Legacy as a DJ, just because it's important to state these things. But I think what I've experienced there is that you have musicians, singers, and rappers of really high caliber. You cannot be a mediocre poet there and hold your own. So I think going into other spaces where it's different, but also where you sometimes realize that the bar is higher.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a sort of separate tangent to go down in terms of calibers and levels and
no, but it's comfort. But it's comfort levels, because you're not going in front of people.
Yeah, but the thing is, what you just said, I have to disagree with you on one point. Is you're saying you cannot be a mediocre poet in a space like that or at an event like that.
You can't be.
But being a mediocre poet in whose opinion? Because for you, someone might be a mediocre poet, or for me, someone might be an amazing poet. It's very subjective. I think what I'm saying is that when you're a young poet on your journey, you have to experience all these different things in order to be able to find your lane and where you operate. Everyone's got a niche, but at the same time, we need to learn to be flexible and versatile. And for those of us that have been in it, where we've got longevity on our side, we've had to learn to reinvent. Reinvention came up before in the conversation. And this is what people are starting to grasp now. Like you've got events like JK does
Cajun Colours, with the painting.
So with the painting and then the dancing and the thing. And now recently we both went to the event on Thursday night. Voices in Power from Philadelphia came over and did their first London event. For me personally, there were so many poets in the room, but not only poets, people from the industry. You had Shady.
Which industry?
You had Shady DJing, and in her own right, she's a UK grime artist, female grime artist.
She's got a tune
who's phenomenal.
But also, she also used to run Word on the Street, which is one of the legendary nights.
Absolutely.
Her and Kingpin used to run it when they were together.
I remember, yeah.
And that was a night that used to sell out. Like, you would actually be turned away at the door if you hadn't had a ticket, because it was rammed.
I remember.
So she's given a lot to the scene in terms of open mic nights, bringing together poets, rappers, singers, and all of that. Which I think we have to acknowledge.
But what I'm saying is that being an artist in her own right, for that evening she was DJing, because that's one of her other hats that she wears, right? She was DJing. But in terms of caliber, you had Fury, doing the videography. You had a lot of the flow poets on the actual team. You had YA, who was on the door, but then also performed on stage. So, but in terms of how slick that night was run, from venue to how it was being filmed, to the DJ, to how it was being hosted by Fusion from BMT Stories, one of the best hosts I've seen, I have to say.
Fusion's amazing.
Just how the whole night was put together, the levels the bar was set very high.
Yeah.
And that's from someone who's been going to poetry events since the early 2000s. For me, the bar was set very high. That's the way to do it.
I think I'm actually dropping a video next week, and it's do you remember Fight Night from 2020? It was a Poets versus MCs in London Bridge.
Vaguely.
Or was that London Tower Bridge? Yeah, I would get them confused. But it was YA versus Rivers, who's a battle rapper, and that you were talking about levels. Levels was set back then when, like, I was just coming as an audience member, and like you were literally walking towards a castle. There's food. There's free food. I don't know any poetry event that does free food.
Yeah.
And the toilets were like Harrods. Like, it was crazy.
This is a Kindred.
Oh, wow.
No, it was
Voices.
No, it was
Voices
Night.
in Power was at Kindred on Thursday.
Yeah, that was on Thursday. But I was talking about like the 2020 Fight Night with Poets versus MCs. Like, just, you're right. Like, when you set
Is that the one where YA went against Rivers?
Yeah, which is dropping next week.
Okay.
It'll be out by the time this podcast comes.
You're aware of that? Like, YA went up and did a battle against a rapper called Rivers, and YA, from what I've heard,
she beats
bodied him.
round 3. But yeah, like you said.
But this is the thing, right? Breaking out of the boxes, breaking out of the fourth wall. So, you know, I think a lot of us, and this is why I don't know if you've done this. I mean, you've got probably about so many different links because of all your different platforms linked together, right? But so many times I've changed the words that are in my IG bio.
I have,
right? Because it's like, you know, how many things you're supposed to list that you do? Poet, spoken word artist, writer. You know, are you going to be specific and break it down into all those different categories? Podcast host, radio host, mentor. Then I thought, why am I listing my CV in the bio of my IG? And then I've changed it multiple times. You know, now it just says wordsmith, because a very good actor who I respect a lot and who's old school, been on the scene for a long time, he said, no, you're a wordsmith, mate, you're a wordsmith. So I thought, yeah, I'm going to take that and put that on there. But a lot of us do so many different things, right? And so YA has got that ability to battle a rap artist because her style is conducive to that, right? It's you know, it's funny because Shay the poet from New York was performing at Voices in Power as well, and even she said, she goes, we're just more aggressive over there. So there's a US style of poetry, the way they deliver it is quite aggressive and in your face.
Rise Felicia.
Right. I was
Rise
just watching
Felicia,
her set.
and also which set?
I was watching Rise Felicia's set at BYOB yesterday with Jay Cage.
But also Guy Kelton Jones.
I showed him.
There's a whole different. The Americans bring.
It's a different energy. It's a different cadence. It's a different attitude. It's a different confidence.
It's not better or worse. It's different.
I didn't say better.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, just so that people don't interpret it who are listening, I'm saying that they just have their way. Right. And I think it's important for us to make sure that we're okay with our style. Absolutely, and that we don't feel that we have to emulate or better them or anyone else. Yeah, it's just like a byproduct of who we are. Like, for example, a London
music
poet.
Industry as well is the
like
same
grime
thing,
versus
right?
Hip-hop,
and it's like the I remember back in like the 90s where it was like you'd have singers over here, but then when they were in R&B or hip hop, they were trying to emulate the Americans because they do it bigger and better. And actually, what's come to light now is how respected the UK scene is, because of our style and our history and our swagger, and you know, just the uniqueness, the blend of cultures here have merged into this melting pot that is unique to the UK, right? And so now we've got even like rap artists from like, you know, Birmingham and, you know, up north that are celebrated because they're different from London rappers, but before they wouldn't get a look in. Right, so now we're really starting to appreciate the diversity, you know, and owning it. And I think that's what it is. It's owning it, right? When you own something, that level of confidence shines through in a way that doesn't come across egotistical or that, you know, like bravado. It's just you going, this is what I am, this is how I speak, this is my accent, this is my style, this is what's informing my work. and so let it speak for itself. And we're starting to do that now, rather than emulate different scenes. You know, Bollywood has never tried to emulate Hollywood.
Yeah.
It's always been an entity of its own, and it's...
I think you're right. I think if you know you're different, own it, and that's whether you're an establishment, an institution, or a person. Like, once you know your wave, own your wave, and then people will want to surf it.
People want to ride it. Exactly. So, you know, like even events, you know, people have got their little different touches that they have, you know, that makes people want to go, I want to experience that. I think the biggest takeaway for me from Thursday was it was an experience. The night, it just wasn't a poetry night, it was an experience, because they introduced these little social elements where people were encouraged to interact with each other and not just sit there passively as an audience member and watch what's going on in stage. It's like everyone in the room, it's your responsibility to have a good time. That's what I liked, is putting the onus back on everyone, taking ownership. You know, don't just sit there because it's so easy as an audience member to criticize, but the courage that it takes to actually get up and express your words or your art or you know, your idea, your concept, bring it to life and share it with others, that's courage. And again, speaking to actors, for example, who say to me, I couldn't do what you do. And I said, what do you mean? Like, you learn scripts all the time off by heart, you'd be great at, you know, learning poetry by memory and reciting it. I said, yeah, but learning a script, that's a character we're playing. That's not us. What you do, that's your personal words, and you're like almost speaking your truth, which is very exposing and can be very vulnerable. I couldn't do that. So there is a lot of kudos that we don't give to our art form, because it is so personal, and there is so much of our personal experience embedded in the words that we write or the pieces that we share. So yeah, I mean, we could talk all day about it, really.
So also I've invited Haroon and Neelofer to discuss their experience with being divorced, and also having the background of being Pakistani as well, and how
Pakistani, Muslim,
yeah,
Desi, but also the particular generation.
Yeah,
because I think that also impacts things compared to, like, I've spoken to people sometimes in their early 20s who've been through marriage or arranged marriage with Pakistani, where it wasn't good and they locked it off like within months of being married. They didn't even get to the 12-month mark. I was like, so admirable. And they're like, don't waste time.
Yeah.
But we'll get to all of that.
I thought I did, but
reintroduce
you were in the process of
it, and then I
interrupted.
Oh, no, that's all right. I might keep
Blame
that in
on
the edit.
ADHD. No, keep it all in.
Yeah, we'll keep it all in. I like the outtakes. Yeah, so obviously I've done a little bit of research. So from the Office of National Statistics,
the ONS,
in 2021 there were over 113,000 divorces granted in England and Wales. That's a 9.6% increase compared to 2020, but obviously there was a pandemic, so that's going to affect rates as well. And also in regards to like surveys and stuff, people from usually ethnic backgrounds don't share a lot of stuff with surveys, from my experience.
We have a certain distrust.
Yeah, we do distrust any establishment trying to censor.
Our trust ain't free.
I can't believe that you can get arrested for not taking part in the census. What is that
Is
about?
that true?
Whoa,
That's actually true.
You
can get legally prosecuted for not completing the census.
That is nuts. I learn something new every day. And obviously, like what's going on right now, people protesting, you're getting arrested for protesting now. Obviously, I've got two guests here who have experienced that, and I just wanted to also have this platform drill down into those experiences, and hopefully it becomes something that anyone watching that's going through something similar or thinking of starting the process of divorce gain some insights from the two guests here.
I never wanted to get married. I certainly wasn't into arranged marriage of all things, and yet I found myself somehow in my mid-20s getting into an arranged marriage. I was married for 10 years. It was never a great union from day one. We had a daughter together. I would say that at the 5-year mark, things were really starting, the cracks were appearing. And then for the final 5 years, it was just a rapid deterioration. And I think for me, I remember very, very clearly in 2017, I was out with a bunch of friends. And I was completely and utterly dysregulated. I hadn't been diagnosed with ADHD or autism back then. I had only very recently been diagnosed with anxiety and depression, because the end of 2016 was when I was finally, I think August 16th was the day I went to my GP and finally came clean that something wasn't right in my head. But I remember going out with friends that night. I had a complete mental breakdown at 3 a.m. in my car when I was dropping a friend off. And I was reeling off every bad thing that was happening in my life. Like, all this is happening, da-da-da. And my friend just looked at me, she's like, it's none of that. I was like, what is it? She's like, it's because you're not loved. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, your home life. And I remember when she said it, it was like I'd been shown something that I could not unsee. In that moment, she sort of sensed my energy. She's like, you get it, you see it. She's like, but I see hesitance. I was like, why? And she's like, because I was like, I don't know how I can be a father. Being divorced, especially as, as a Pakistani man, we're told that family units stay together. But I think once I saw what I saw and I had the epiphany, I couldn't unsee it. And it was helped by the fact that I think because I'd lived most of my life disassociating from myself due to just huge levels of trauma. And my marriage itself was, it was a very dysfunctional, oftentimes bullying and abusive relationship from my ex-partner. Yeah, cameras are on, I'm just going to say it, because the state of like my post-marriage relationship, and even where things are as of very recently, we've spoken about things with my daughter that have completely disintegrated, who's now got a very different view on everything. A, I have nothing to lose, but B, I think there probably are other people in this similar types of situations, and I think to have it out in the open can hopefully at least give other people some form of being seen and support so they can work through it. Because I think divorce at the best of times is not easy.
Yeah.
With children it isn't. But when you throw in variables like being Muslim, being South Asian, and the involvement of like extended families, it becomes very complicated. Once the epiphany happened, and I think also because I started medicating for my depression, I could see things very clearly. And in my instance, I wasn't willing to take a lot of the things that were thrust at me. I started talking back. I started pushing back. And I think what I've noticed, not just in this context, I've noticed it in many other areas, because I'm autistic, and autistic people are statistically at a higher probability of bullying, abuse, and other kind of sort of manipulative behaviour and gaslighting. I found that just in real life, when you stop taking the bullying and when you push back, those who bully don't like it. And I think for me, once the realization was there was no going back. Once that realization happened, I think my marriage ended within a month.
Did you stay in the house for that long? And
so I'm going to speak very publicly on this. Me and my ex had a discussion about being split up, but potentially living together, partly for financial reasons, but partly because we could still co-parent. We had that agreement, but a week later, she basically said to me, look, whatever you can stick in your boot, take it and get out. I don't want you here. So I actually remember the first night, I had nowhere to stay. I'm an alum of London Business School in Marylebone. Because their library 24 hours, I tried to sleep in the library, but I couldn't get away with it. I got thrown out by security. And then I drove at 5 a.m. To my cousin's in Luton. I waited about 2 hours until 7 to knock on the door. And I explained what had happened, and it's like, okay, don't finish the sentence, just come in and just get some sleep.
How long did you stay there? Like, how did you find your way back into like finding a place and trying to get stable?
Well, my cousin, she was like, look, I could let you stay. I can't keep you a secret because, you know, my dad, who's your uncle, or what we call in Pakistan, like in our culture, you know, your mamu, which means your maternal uncle. You know, my dad, your uncle, lives down the road. I can't hide you. So I remember talking to him, and I told him what happened. And I think his thing was like, look, get out of my daughter's house. I'll house you. And he housed me for about 2 months. And he was very instrumental in certain things. I had sort of agreed with my ex-wife that we would try and make it very amicable. And thank you. And she sort of said to me that, look, you know, we'll try, but you got to be real. Like, family, people are going to get involved, and it will get messy. But I still, because of my sort of literalism as an autistic person, I still sort of believe in the better nature of people. But my uncle, who's a more cynical person, let's just say, he helped shield me. Like, basically, I think my idealism and his cynicism brought us to a middle ground where I didn't get completely torn apart in my divorce. Because I was just like, no, I want it to be amicable. And, you know, he was a character. He's like, Haroon, we're going to make sure it all goes down the middle. And I was like, yeah, but because by that time, I think after 2 months, I had to leave his place because I went on BBC to talk about mental health. And while he's a very nurturing person, my uncle, talking about mental health on TV while I was going through a divorce, that was a last straw. So he tore into me in front of his children and his foster children very heavily, sort of saying, look, I know that, you know, the trigger warning, I know you were abused when you were younger, because there were, again, trigger warning, I'd been sexually abused when I was younger as well by an older male relative. He was like, yeah, I know that happened to you, and I know you had a horrible wife, but apart from that, you're okay. There's nothing wrong with you. You made a fool of yourself, da-da-da. Within 48 hours, or within the week, I'd signed a lease for a place in Streatham on my own. And that's sort of how I housed myself. But in the 3 years after that, I moved house about 8 or 9 times. I had a lot of friends telling me that I should have forced the sale of the house and just let my ex-wife and daughter go into a hostel, council housing or whatever, but I didn't do that. And I think once the company I was working for went bankrupt and I was having mental health struggles, I went from renting a place of my own and being quite self-sufficient to being in a situation where, yeah, basically I just did flat and house shares, but struggled with it due to my mental health and due to the fact that not everyone's very nice at times. So yeah, that's kind of how that sort of played out. And it took 3 years to get the divorce because my ex refused to grant it unless there were certain financial settlements made.
Neelofer, what was your story like in terms of, you know, starting that process? Was that something similar or quite different?
So my marriage was a love marriage. I met my ex-husband through friends, and it was, knew each other for 2 years before getting married, and from my point of view, had all the discussions that you need to have with someone that you're considering settling down with and marrying, because marriage is a big deal. You don't just and I'd waited to get married and to start a family. So I was in my 30s when I got married. So we knew each other for 2 years before. And like I said, from my point of view, we'd had all the discussions that you need to have in order to, as much as you can. I mean, there's no guarantees, and people can lie.
People change as well.
People change as well. But, in terms of like, being on the same page about things, what kind of life do you want? Do you want kids? All of these things, your compatibility, as it were. And got married so we met in 2012. Our first date was, I remember the London Olympics were happening.
Oh, yeah.
And we met at South Bank. And, when you meet someone and you click with them straight away and you're like, oh, wow, after a long, long time. I've been single for a long time before that. And, to give some context, yes, I am Muslim Pakistani, but so yes, there was before I had met my ex-husband, obviously my family were saying, should we introduce you to someone? And we call it a rishta, where a proposal comes from a family or people that your family know. And I'd had a few of those, and I just really wasn't very interested, because I already knew, because I wasn't a young girl. I already knew myself and who I am, and I already knew that a traditional marriage, in the sense of it being arranged and there being heavy involvement in terms of both family sides, and because I come from a single parent household, so. And that has, I think, a lot to do with it as well, in terms of my own personal journey. So I didn't have my father in my life. So I'm a product of divorce in terms of my parents.
I see.
So I think that has a bearing. But yeah, so I didn't want the traditional wedding, the heavy involvement of families and, all of that stuff. It just wasn't for me. And for example, so one of the cultural expectations when you're female Muslim Pakistani, even that you've been born and raised in London, British, is that, when you get married, it's often expected that you'll go and live with your in-laws, so with your husband's family. I already said, not me. I've been living independently for years, so that's not going to work for me. So anyway, like I said, we got to know, we knew each other for 2 years, and I thought that was a long enough time to establish a healthy relationship. I met his parents, went over to Cyprus to meet his parents, who had retired over there. Yeah. He met my family. We were mutually accepted by each other's family, and I was like, hey, yeah, this is the person, this is my person.
Yeah.
It wasn't all fairy tales and roses, but there was enough qualities in that person for me to say, yes, I want to give it a go and build a life with this person. So we got married in 2014. And for me, my experience was that very soon after getting married, and when I say very soon, I mean on the honeymoon,
wow, he
did a 180. He did a 180, and I was like,
in this context.
And I was like, what? Who is this person?
Yeah.
Because it felt like how he was behaving was not the person that I'd known for the past 2 years and who I'd chosen to marry. The behaviour was just completely different and really strange, really odd, really upsetting. So there was lying, cheating, betrayal, total refusal of showing any affection, total refusal to communicate. And I was like, obviously it's like someone ripping the floor from underneath you, because you've just got married and you've got all these dreams, aspirations and hopes that you're going to build a life with this person, and then they start behaving like that. So from my point of view, I loved him very much. I was very much in love with him, and I wanted to make it work. So tried everything in terms of friends helping and family, getting involved in terms of talking to him, marriage counselling, all of these things. Tried to do everything in my power to try and fix whatever was wrong.
Yeah.
And you very quickly realise that can never work. Because for a marriage to work, in particular, but for a relationship to work, you need both parties, both sides, on board and willing to put the work in, because it's a choice. It's a choice, and like I said, it wasn't arranged, so it was by choice we chose to get married. And he would say things to me like, "Oh, getting married to you on our wedding day, that was the happiest day of my life." So you can understand me being completely confused as to well, then if that's the case, why what's happening? And unfortunately with him, it was almost like a domino effect, because one thing happened and then the dominoes just fell, and it was almost like one lie turned into a bigger lie, and it was just like things started unraveling. And it's scary for a woman who is strong-minded, who is independent, who has got a loving family. Even for someone like that, it's scary to think that you are married to a man and you share a house with this man and you sleep in the same bed at night as this man and you don't know who they are. That is a very, very scary prospect. And it transpired. So at first it was, one reason given or another given reason, a reason given, and then 2 weeks later it wasn't that reason anymore and it's something else. So obviously the trust just went. I'm a person who values communication. The communication wasn't there. It was just a nightmare. It was awful, and just trying to make it work. So I'll give you some examples. So, the 2 years that we got to know each other before getting married, we had a plan. So we were both working, and we didn't want a huge wedding, but we wanted like a close, intimate, his family and close friends, my family and close friends. So we were both working, and every month we'd put a chunk of each of our salaries into a joint account to save for, to pay for the wedding, and all of these things. So you think, okay, the way you're moving and operating with someone, you're both in the same boat and rowing in the same direction. You want the same things and all that. And then after marriage, it was like all these debts came out of nowhere that I didn't know he had, and he was taking payday loans, even though he didn't need to because he was working full time. Gambling that I was totally kept from me. You would think 2 years I would have got a little bit of a hint or an idea. Talking to other women online, so secret kind of
rendezvous.
But just like creating
emotional infidelity.
That as well as creating multiple social media accounts that weren't even him, but using it to talk to, it was just, honestly, it was like something out of a film. Like when I discovered all of this.
It sounds like an addict.
Well, he was
the gambling thing.
Well, gambling, and also then it came about that he was addicted to weed, and just all of these things came out, and it was it's like you've pulled the wool over my eyes. And I'm not a naive person by any means. So he obviously played a very good game in order to, and I don't know what his end goal was. Yeah,
because I was going to ask that, like, what was it, just so that he could get money from the joint account to pay off those debts? Or
no, I mean, the thing is, I think when he saw me, he saw I was independent, he saw I had a place of my own, and knowing what I know now, I didn't know at the time, he had no aspirations to build any kind of life for himself. So you see someone who loves you and cares for you very much and very nurturing, and whose life you can slot into. Everything was ready-made. He didn't bring anything to the table.
He just wanted to move into.
He didn't want to build. Okay.
He didn't want to build.
He just wanted.
Although we'd had all those conversations that we were going to. So initially it'd be a compromise. Okay, you move in with me with a view to us saving, getting a house, having a family, all of these things. None of that happened because I just spent my entire time just working and supporting the household. There'll be times where he wouldn't work then. So very soon after, again, from working full-time, being financially solvent and responsible, as I thought, again, 180, didn't change, not working. And, I was supporting the household, supporting him, and just dealing with someone who wasn't there, who didn't want to be there. And then when I would ask, the reasons why, so that we could try and sort of resolve or fix things, it was like, well, I don't know. So it becomes an impossibility with someone who's hasn't got the emotional capacity to communicate. And then it was, and we went into therapy, then it had come about that certain things had happened in his childhood, which he then said, this is the cause of my behaviour, which for someone like me who's an empath and who is a natural giver, motivator, nurturer, I just wanted to, again, I wanted to heal, I wanted to fix, I wanted to love that pain out of him, and it doesn't work.
No, you cannot love the pain out of another person.
You cannot do that. But what actually happened is, the reason I decided to essentially stop beating my head against a brick wall, because that is what it had become, is my grandmother. I went to visit my grandmother, and I was very, very close with my grandmother.
Nani or Dada?
Nono. She's passed away since, and I was very close with her growing up, very, very close. I would say in some ways I was closer to my grandmother than my mum. And she went to see her, and she sat there and she looked at me and she said, "You're not happy, and you're not yourself. What's going on?"
It's always another person that that pulls you over that bridge to be like,
but for her
all is not well.
But for her to say it, who's the closest person to me, who's brought me up since I was a baby, and for her, who is old school generation, I'm talking, born in the 1920s, you would think that someone like that would never ever encourage me to break away from a marriage. That's an old school person who was not allowed to go to school growing up, who's read the Quran, who reads namaz. She said to me, "You're not happy, you're not yourself. Get out of this situation, because I can see you're in a lot of internal pain right now, and I don't want that for you." For her to say that to me, I was like, wow, there's something deeply wrong. And this person has drained the life out of me, and I'm no longer me. And it took a long time after starting those divorce proceedings, because then once that started and I said I wanted to break up and I couldn't be in this marriage anymore, like it was literally affecting my mental health. I was getting anxiety attacks, depression, all of that. All of a sudden, no, I'll change. I don't want a divorce. I want to stay with you. And it was a real nightmare to try and go through that process. And it took a year.
He wanted to keep all of the creature comforts the lifestyle that you could basically enable and provide.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's what he was scared of losing, not you.
Yes, exactly. And so it took a year. So the divorce was finally granted in 2017. I paid for it all. At first, he went AWOL, so wasn't even there to receive the paper. It was just a nightmare. He made it as difficult as he could. However, there weren't shared assets in terms of where we lived and everything.
Lucky
that
you.
was
Everything
mine.
was in your name.
I remember when we got married, he insisted on let's have joint accounts. So apart from that joint account we were putting into, he wanted us to merge our accounts. I said no. We can have a joint account that bills come out of, but I will have my own and you have mine. And I'm so glad that I insisted on that. Because I would have literally been bankrupt the way he was carrying on.
Yeah.
And the process took a year, but during that year of when we were going through the divorce, because I don't know, but for someone who hasn't gone through it, you have to file a petition for divorce. You have to give certain grounds for that divorce, why you're pursuing for it. Then it has to be served on the other party. Yeah. They have to then accept it and sign it, that they've acknowledged that they're accepting it. If they contest it, that then can draw it out even longer.
Wow.
But also, once they have agreed that, between the decree nisi and the decree absolute, there's a waiting period.
Yep.
So it's not overnight.
Wow.
Yeah.
You can't do it.
During that period, he was stalking me. So obviously he'd moved out, we weren't together. He'd turn up at my job. He'd be waiting there when I got home, like sat up in the car. Like, it was an absolute nightmare. So, apart from the emotional turmoil, and the thing about it is as you know, as bad as things had gotten, as bad as he was treating me, you got to remember I loved him very much. So it hurts when you love someone.
Yeah.
And not only have they disappointed you, but they've betrayed your trust, which is huge. But it's really, really difficult to know what the right thing to do is, in terms of, I knew I had to be out of that situation. It wasn't good for me. But emotionally really, really hard, especially when the other person is emotionally manipulative, knows how to push your buttons, knows how to creep drawing you in. Like I said, and he was stalking me, turn up at my work and things like that. And it was just a really, really difficult period in my life. I'm very lucky that I'm very close with my sister. She was there for me. You know, my grandmother was there for me, bless her. I had her support, and my best friend.
Yeah.
The wider family, not so much. It was a very, very lonely time. So I would say it's a very, very difficult thing to go through. But what I would say is taking it back before divorce, and I know that's the subject of today, and there's quite a stigma attached to divorce in general for anyone, because it's like, oh, you couldn't make it work. It's that generalized stigma. But in particular in South Asian culture, there's a real negative stigma. Divorce is not something you do, right?
Yep.
You know, the sanctity of marriage and all of those things, and culturally it's like, oh, you know, well, and people start to talk and all of that. Now, luckily, I came from a family who were not going to ever make me endure a marriage or a situation that was going to put me in, you know, problems in terms of my mental health or my safety or my well-being. But what I can say is that 2020, you know, hindsight is 2020, and in retrospect, you know, we can see things very clearly. Yeah. Now I see there was a lot of red flags that I chose to ignore because of feelings, because of being in love with this person. So my advice to anyone would be is have those conversations. Like this whole thing of bringing 50-50, absolute nonsense. Bring 100 and 100. Bring a whole of yourself. If that person is not whole, you know, like there was little things, red flags that I chose to ignore. Like I didn't meet a lot of his friends, even in that 2 years.
Big red flag.
Yeah. So in that 2 years we were getting to know each other before we actually got married. Yes, I met his family, and for me, I think that was huge because of how they welcomed me with open arms. They were lovely, lovely people. And I have to say, even after I got divorced, I was still in touch with my in-laws because they were beautiful. Very, very loving, beautiful, clean-hearted people. Yeah, their son didn't turn out to be that way. And even my mother-in-law said to me, she goes, we didn't raise him like that, so I don't know. But, you know, I was welcome in their house even after the divorce. Like, they loved me like a daughter. They gave me a lot of love. That's wonderful. I will always be thankful for that. Both of them have also passed away since. You know, may they rest in peace. And I'll be very, very thankful for that. And thankful to my grandmother and mum, who probably also saw he's not quite up to the mark for our daughter. But because of my happiness, because they wanted me to be happy, they supported it. So I was very lucky. But now when I look back, I'm like, there was way too many red flags that I chose to ignore.
But it's difficult to see them, because I remember once my things were set in motion for my marriage to end, and I'd been asked to leave. Yeah. I remember saying certain things to a friend. So, for example, my ex-wife, one of her big things was, oh yeah, you know, all your friends just tell you what you want to hear. You got yes men, whatever. I didn't know how to read into that because, again, I grew up in a family where my mum hated my friends. I very much married someone who was as unnurturing and as abusive to me as my mother. And my friend, in fact, of all the days, you know, it's the 3rd year anniversary of Ty passing away. And he said to me, he's like, he was with some other friends I had a bunch of friends rally around me when it happened, who really, particularly South London mixed friends. I'm just going to say, you know, South London
represent. Come on now.
South London.
South London is strong today. South London
cradled me in their arms with love. South London family and collective. And he immediately identified, oh, she's cutting you off from your friends and your support group by demonizing, not wanting, because when the split happened, I had to go and rebuild friendships that I left by the wayside for 10 years. And it's a testament to a lot of people in my life that they're like, it's cool. You're free next week? We got you.
It's so important to have a support system. Like going through something like that alone is really, really difficult. You do need those close bonds and close relationships to get you through. But one thing I would say in terms of, you know, because I know we're talking about divorce, but in terms of how it can help other people, you know, you've got the practicalities, the cost, the time thing that it takes, and how difficult it is to communicate, especially when the relationship's broken down and all of those things. But let's take it back before you make that decision to marry, I think some people don't, whether it's, I mean, you know, arranged, and I have to make a point. I'm not against arranged marriage. A lot of people think, oh, you know, modern day or younger sort of Asian Muslims are not into the arranged marriage because they think it's bad. Let me make it very clear. Anything that is forced or that doesn't have consent, yes, I'm totally against that. But the concept as a whole of arranged marriage, I actually think if it's done properly, it's a great thing, because it's like your elders vetting that other person in the family. I remember my grandmother used to say, Khandan ko dekho. Khandan means their lineage, you know, the family of this person. Who is that person? You know, they don't exist in a bubble. They come from something, from somewhere. And all of that is really important when you're looking at how compatible you're going to be, because people focus on connection and chemistry and then forget about compatibility. And compatibility is the one thing you need to make a marriage work, apart from excellent communication and compromise. Compatibility.
But I would contest, and maybe it's just because of my own example where I feel like I'm an outlier or an anomaly in this sort of setup. I absolutely am not against arranged marriages. However, you have to know who you are.
Oh, 100%.
And for me, I think what I found astounding was I wasn't forced, but I was definitely pressured that if you ever want a relationship with someone, a woman, it's this or it's nothing. And I was at a very vulnerable, broken time in my life where, because I hadn't been diagnosed with all these things, I got pushed about, or I got quite, because you're like, this is the way.
I think in your particular context, though, you know, in your particular example, you didn't have, first of all, you didn't have the diagnosis and the self-knowledge that was what you were contending with, but also the lack of support and understanding from your family. No, but, you know, and you compound that on top of them saying, well, to have a legitimate relationship, you know, for it to be halal and all of those things, it has to be through marriage. That's many levels of succumbing to pressure, right?
But for me, it still astonishes me in this setup where I connect with people now in this space where I'm healing and I'm stepping into being, you know, my sort of true self. People who've known me for less than 5 minutes are like, you arranged marriage? How? Because it doesn't work. It's not for me.
It's not for everyone.
It works for many people.
Yeah.
But also, my issue is, one, I wouldn't trust my own family as far as I can throw them to make decisions for me. And that now has showed itself in terms of how it's punched a 10-year plus hole in my life. But also, I still contest the whole looking at a family that I know people don't exist in a bubble. But then where does that leave people like me if you're to judge me by where I came from and who I've come from?
Exactly.
So
and that's
it's
why
a tough one.
It is a tough one. It's not for everyone. But in terms of where I'm coming from, I think that, you know, like it's like this new Netflix program that, you know, Indian Matchmaker, you know, the whole matchmaking.
I saw the first season of it because there's actually a well-known podcaster in America who was on it.
And there's different, you know, people. I mean, she does a lot of matchmaking with Indian, you know, people. So there's UK, the thing about UK, US, and India. But you know, in terms of, you know, like in India, they have like certain different religions, and you know they have like the caste system and other things that they consider when it comes to matchmaking, and like, you know, which caste do they belong to, and all of these things. But in terms of that whole matchmaking thing, it comes back to the compatibility. Exactly. It's like, what are you looking for? And I think if there's no coercion or pressure involved, and you have, so the caveat would be, I believe in the concept of arranged marriage, if there is a healthy bond and relationship between you and your family. They know you very well, know what would work for you, have your best interests at heart, and there's no coercion or pressure in that sense. It's just like, we want to find you someone really nice. And also, it's more like an introduction. There's no you have to.
Yeah, exactly.
It's more like an introduction, because now I'm looking at modern day life, and it's like, if I was to even think about entering into another relationship, where would I meet someone? Where? Online dating is not for me. Tried it, absolutely awful.
Right? I hate it too.
Absolutely awful. I hate it. I've had some really bad experiences, and it's just not for me. I am analog. I'm an analog girl in a digital world. I'm old.
I refer to myself as an analog boy in a digital world,
and
so
I
can relate.
Honestly, I just don't like it. It's not for me. Like, there's so much masks that people wear and dishonesty, and it's become...
It's easier
people
to
are
hide
disposable, easier to hide, but people are disposable.
Yeah.
It's like, that one didn't work, keep swiping next. It's become...
It's like a numbers game.
It's awful.
Yeah, it's a numbers game.
It's awful. So, but I think to myself, in my context, like, okay, I work, I'm a creative, there's loads of people I meet, but in terms of meeting someone for, like, I don't know where I'd meet someone. I'd love to be able to be in a position where my family were like, oh, here's someone we think, you know, but my mum and my nan are not around anymore to do that for me. So, it's a very, very interesting one. Although I would say, they say never, but after the experience I had, I don't know, it would take a lot, almost a miracle, for me to ever consider getting married again.
I mean, for me, I don't think I ever really did want to be married.
I go from you that you didn't want to be married again. Like the way you'd go on.
Yeah, but not even that. I don't think I ever wanted to be I don't think marriage was part of my operating system from day one.
Okay. Yeah.
So for me, definitely don't want to do it again. I am a romantic. I mean, I'm a poet.
You have to. Yeah, you have to
be.
To
I do believe in love. And I would like for something to work out. Wouldn't be marriage, but definitely I don't want to have children again. I'm in my 40s now. I don't want to go and do that rodeo again. Sure. Also because I just have a clear idea of who I am and what my goals are. I think if we're looking at how our stories can sort of help other people, I think it's about looking at the bookending of things, right? At the beginning, I think you do have to try and ask important questions.
Yeah.
You need to know a bunch of stuff.
But that includes the difficult conversations as well. Not like
children,
do we like the same music, and do we like going on the same holidays, and what kind of house do we live in? I'm talking about religion. Like for example, children. And say for example you've married interfaith, which was my marriage. He was not Muslim, right?
I see.
There was the conversations that we had. Like if we had a boy, I would want the boy to be circumcised, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about like actual difficult conversations, because when children are involved, it becomes a whole new ball game. I didn't have children with him, and that's something I had to mourn. There are certain things you can mourn, not just people who pass away. The death of someone you mourn is the death of the possibility of things. And I really, really wanted a family, and so part of me going through the healing process after the divorce was mourning the fact that opportunity was taken away from me. And I'm not saying I can't have kids, but that was for me as a woman, and being diabetic and having health concerns and age, that was a very key time for me. So I didn't have children, but in a way God is good all the time. My grandmother also said to me, it's actually a very, very good thing you never had kids with him, because when you don't have kids with someone, there's the ability to make the clean break. When you have children, there's always that drawback and connection with that person.
I can attest to that.
Yeah,
is all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
But if you go through with it and it still doesn't work out, I think it's really important. Have a good team around you.
Support group.
Good support group, but also, I'm going to be real, have a good solicitor. I had a solicitor that I burned a lot of time and money, and they did very little. And then I switched to another solicitor, and this solicitor was like a pit bull. Almost too aggressive. She was like, you're too soft, Haroon. We need to put your ex and her lawyer on their knees. And I was like, whoa.
I mean, this is the thing. So I was lucky. I had a school friend of mine who had gone into family law, and she advised me. I filed myself, not through the solicitors, because again, I didn't want to pay that extra money. So I paid to file the petition. That was like £500 in itself, and then all of those things. But but yours was different because you needed a solicitor in terms of because you had assets, you had children.
Do you remember there was an 80s movie with Michael Douglas in it, War of the Roses?
Yes.
So Ty used to, anyone who ask about, what's going on with Haroon's divorce? It's like, War of the Roses.
Yeah.
People, that was just like the shorthand of like, oh,
yeah.
Okay?
I know people. My cousin's been through a divorce, and he had a lot of assets. He's got 2 kids. So again, very different ball game when it comes to practicalities and, you know, emotional repercussions for the children as well, and all of that. But then
I think that's a big conversation to have with your partner, is around finances and assets.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, lifestyles, all of these things. You know, how do you want your children to be educated? All of these things.
Yeah.
People don't think about that. They're like, oh yeah,
they're just in the
I'm
moment.
loved up, and
then,
you know, this is the right person. And it's like, yeah, but you're actually going to think what your lives are going to look like.
Yeah.
It's funny. So I heard something recently that said, when you choose your partner, both sides. So for me, it would be when if I chose a husband or if I chose a partner, and for you, it would be if you chose a wife or if you chose a girlfriend or partner. When you choose your partner, you choose your lifestyle.
That's actually...
I let that marinate. But it's very, very true. And that actually came from a life coach. And when you really break that down, you really, really do. You've got to think about what your life will look like with that person. When you choose your partner, you choose your lifestyle. So I'll give you a very quick example. Someone got into a relationship where the emotional connection was very strong.
Yeah.
But in terms of two people, they were so different. Yeah. One person loves to travel, loves their food, loves to going to new places. The other one didn't like being in crowds, didn't like socializing, didn't like to travel, was vegan,
not going to work.
It's just too many things that were different.
Yeah.
So as controversial and as cynical as it may sound, love is not enough. Because we all want, as individuals, we all want someone who will support our dreams.
Yeah.
Yeah? That's natural. Nothing wrong with that. We all want someone who's going to match us on many levels, right? That's also natural. Nothing wrong with that. But don't get married or don't get involved in a serious, long-term committed relationship unless you are also prepared to support the other person's dreams. Because that's really important. Like, it's a choice. You know, like you work at a job to do really well, or you work at your creative project to achieve things. That's a choice you make to do that. Marriage is not something that just exists in of itself. Every day you have to work at it. Every day you have to make a choice to be with the person. So that's what I would say is be prepared to do what it takes to also support the other person. And if you can find someone who can support your dreams just as hard as you support theirs, then you're onto a winner.
That's actually awesome. So just to close out, because I want people to take some useful cliff notes on how to learn from both your experiences, in terms of like rebuilding, in terms of resources and things like that. Like, what are your kind of what is your advice for people about to start divorce proceedings, or even just trying to, you know, prevent any getting into a kind of like a long-term marriage which is essentially bad for them?
I think whether you want to prevent getting into a marriage that's bad for you, or whether you want to navigate your way through divorce, counselling, therapy, therapeutic counselling, whatever labels, find someone. Because when it's falling apart, you need that support and that reminder of who you are. If it's before the marriage, I would say get therapy so that you have an idea of who you are before you make decisions. Because we all change. But if you know your true North Star and your true centre of gravity, even as you change over a long-term relationship, it won't be a 180. You'll always have one foot firmly in your centre of gravity. You might pivot and move around. That gives you a fighting chance of being in a relationship, but that makes it more fair on your partner as well. So I think
I would say I would agree with you. I think getting the right help, you know, whether that be in the form of therapy or that needing time out, whatever that looks like for you, definitely do that. But just be very, very kind to yourself, you know, in that whole healing process, and give yourself time. What I would say is the worst thing you can do is when trying to heal from a breakup is bad enough, but a divorce in particular, give yourself space and time. The worst thing you can do is jump into something else, because even if you think you're ready, you're not. Like, honestly, I see too many of this jumping from one relation to another. It's really, really not good, because you're not being fair to yourself or the other person that you're getting involved with.
You're just complicating people's lives for no reason.
Just give yourself the space and time. And actually being single, you know, there's something to be said for enjoying being single as well.
I enjoy it.
You know, not being answerable to someone else, or doing what you need to do, or having that the luxury, you know, and the space and the time to actually show yourself a lot of self-care and self-love, to be able to pursue your dreams without someone holding you back. There's so much value in that. I think we need to shout about that louder, in terms of, don't put a stigma to, are you single? Are you not with anyone? It's like, why is that a bad thing? Why is being single a bad thing? Why is not being with someone? I know people that are with people just for the sake of being. That would never be me. Like, I am actually really, really happy being single.
I love that, because what you said, because I've had friends that have always been in relationships and they feel really weird not being in one.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you've not even had the chance to like discover yourself.
Right.
Like everything that you
that
just
happens.
said,
You see people who are serial monogamists.
Yeah.
You just jump.
That's nuts, right?
So no jumping, more pausing.
Taking time for yourself.
Time for yourself.
Press pause.
Yeah, press pause.
Also press play.
Yeah, which will, I was also going to say, like, as we close out, how will people be able to find you guys and learn more about you and support your projects?
So for me, I don't do any social media apart from Instagram.
LinkedIn though.
Yeah, LinkedIn. I
For
don't
work.
really see that as social media as much as that's more of a professional networking thing. It's been great for me, and I think more people should use LinkedIn in terms of projects, networking, work, and all of that stuff. But in terms of social media for the creative stuff I do, it's Instagram. My Instagram is at Neelofer, which is NEELOFER_Nova. Saying that, I do post on there, you know, if I'm performing or, you know, I'm doing an event or things like that. But in terms of, there was a time where I was putting out content every day. I've really taken a step back from that, because what I have learnt over the past year or so, and I think I was spending a lot of time on social media during the lockdown, like we all were. What I've realised in the past year or so is that even if I'm not posting every day, it doesn't mean I'm not being creative, I'm not writing, I'm not editing, I'm not, you know, processing, I'm not living. Like, what I'm trying to say is, don't forget to live. You don't need to be posting every single thing, you know,
facts,
all the time. So I would just say, like, I'm now at a place where I take any kind of social media with a pinch of salt. It's a great tool. It's a great tool. You will know because of all the platforms you have. But at the same time, if you go on my Instagram, don't expect me like to be posting 100 stories a day about where I am and what I'm eating and what I'm doing. Like, when you need to know about something, you'll see it. Yeah.
That's what I love her. What about you, Haroon?
Me, I have quite a few embassies on the internet. So yeah, I do bits and pieces on Twitter at Haroon Creates, HAROON Creates, but that's not the most active place. I am most active on Instagram. So obviously my podcast, Speakeasy with Haroon, that's HAROON. You can get that on Instagram. You can follow the podcast that I do, and this episode is like one of our joint episodes that we do together.
For sure.
On Instagram, my personal account at Haroon Creates, HAROON Creates, and you'll see that for my YouTube channel as well. It's the same handle, but particularly the most active place is Instagram. You'll see me there posting music that I've made and talking about creative stuff, putting poems up. My launch party for my debut book,
Next
Press
month.
Play, will be happening in September. So if this this gets released in August, then September the 9th at Leo Foods in Sydenham. My debut book, my collection of poetry, Press Play, is what you should be checking out. It's going to be probably the biggest thing that I've done yet, and I'm working really hard to craft a launch party that isn't just reading a bunch of poems. We're going to make sure it's an experience.
Wicked. And you can find me at The Metaphorest. That's The Metaphor with a PH and an EST at the end, all one word, on Instagram and YouTube. I also have the Metaforecast on Instagram too. That's with a FO. And yeah, you can find me anywhere usually when there's poetry going on in London. And yeah, keeping it short and sweet. Thank you guys for watching. Peace.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Peace.
Cheese. Hey. What a good
That
sign
was
off.
intense.